Good afternoon, and welcome back to INSA's The New IC, Empowering Women and Engaging Men. Today's panel, How Diversity and Inclusion Drive Innovation. I'd now like to introduce INSA Executive Vice President, John Doyen.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the fourth day of our week-long New IC program. The past few days have been truly outstanding, and today's conversation, which we open to the entire community, has attracted more than 1,600 registered attendees. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time this week, welcome. We're glad you're here, and we value your participation. For all attendees, if you missed any of the events this week, check out our website to view the recordings, program recaps, social highlights, and so much more. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items. First, we encourage your participation, so please submit your questions through the questions box on the right side of your screen. Also, we welcome members of the press who are with us here today, and this is a reminder that this program is on the record. And finally, I'd like to thank all our sponsors for their critical support of this program. We simply could not deliver this kind of premier programming without the support of our partners. And now I'm pleased to welcome Matice Wright Springer, Vice President for Government and Corporate Responsibility at Mantech, who will introduce our moderator. But first, I have an interesting fact about Matice that I hope she doesn't mind that I'm sharing with you today. Earlier this week, I discovered that in addition to her distinguished career in the private and public sector, Matice, who is a U.S. Naval Academy graduate, is our nation's first African-American female naval flight officer. That is a terrific accomplishment, Matice, and one that feels worth recognizing, especially this week. So Matice, over to you.
Wow, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, John, for recognizing that achievement, I'm honored to have accomplished what I've done so far. But once again, Mantech is a proud sponsor of this week-long INSA program. You know, I've attended a lot of INSA events in the past, but this is the first time that I've actually had the opportunity to speak. And I think the timeliness of today's diversity and inclusion panel aligns really well with the numerous discussions that have occurred in many of our workplaces. At Mantech, we believe a diverse workforce is a business imperative, and that diversity, equality, and inclusion help inspire differentiated solutions that are essential for our national security customers. At Mantech, we know that diverse teams are critical to the development of innovative solutions that require integration for legacy and other unique systems. We also know that an inclusive work environment characterized by appreciating employees' differences is essential to increasing employee productivity and satisfaction in the workplace. And with that said, it is my pleasure today to introduce our moderator, Suzanne Wilson-Heckenberg, the president of INSA. Suzanne directs INSA's daily operations and provides strategic guidance regarding membership, external partnerships, and policy initiatives developed by INSA's member-led councils and task forces. She has held several leadership positions within INSA, including serving as the first Chief Operating Officer. In addition, Suzanne was a driving force behind the creation of the New IC program in 2018. Each year, Suzanne continues to make INSA programs timelier and more informative. Will you please join me in welcoming Suzanne Wilson-Heckenberg?
Thank you, Matice. I'm humbled by your introduction. Before we get started, I wanted to ensure that we have strong audience participation. As John mentioned earlier, if you have questions, please submit them through the question portal on the right side of your computer screen. I really enjoy it when I see who the questions are coming from and the organizations that you all are affiliated with. We are pleased to welcome members of the press to the webinar. This is a reminder that the program is on the record, and the recording will be available on INSA's website by the end of the day tomorrow. And finally, I would like to thank all of our sponsors for their critical support of this program. It certainly bears repeating. We could not deliver this kind of programming without the support of our corporate sponsors. So a special thanks to Mantech today. This week, we have heard some powerful personal stories from leaders with a variety of different backgrounds and personal experiences, both some good and some bad. While there are no easy answers, the willingness to share their personal journeys, their insights, and examples of models of success has been very inspiring. Notably, we have been challenged to consider how will we use our power? Will it be for inclusion or exclusion? Today, we will examine how diversity, whether it be ethnicity, neurodiversity, a disability, or gender, make the intelligence and national security communities richer, stronger, and more robust. We will also consider how each of us can use our power to build diverse and inclusive workplaces. Although we may only hit the tip of the spear during today's panel, it does set the scene for future conversations related to diversity, inclusion, and enrichment that INSA intends on supporting for many days ahead, specifically in September at the AFCEA and INSA Intelligence and National Security Summit, where we will be hosting a panel. I am both blessed and delighted to moderate this critical conversation today and over the next hour with these four passionate and inspirational leaders. So now on to our panelists. We have Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins, the CEO, founder, and executive director at Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security and Conflict Transformation, otherwise known as WCAP. Sharonda Dorsey, Chief of Talent Acquisition at CIA, and Teresa Thomas, Program Lead, Neurodiverse Talent Recruitment at MITRE, and Maggie Feldman-Pilch, CEO and founder at NatSec Girl Squad. Now, I'm not going to read their individual bios to you, but I would like to start with one question for each of our panelists, starting with you, Bonnie. I want to know from each of you, what about this panel topic resonates with you personally and your role within your respective organizations? Bonnie, over to you.
Great, thank you, Suzanne and Matice for doing this. Thanks to INSA for inviting me. This topic is very important to me because one of the reasons why I established WCAPS, Women of Color Advancing Peace, Security, and Conflict Transformation, is because I wanted to give a voice to women of color who often do not have a voice in policy formulation on issues of peace and security, including issues of defense and intelligence. And so the very foundation of what we're trying to do is to recognize that we need a policy policy bodies that are inclusive and that are diverse, recognizing that by being more diverse and inclusive, we will actually have better policies and more effective policies, both for the US and internationally. So thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Sharonda.
Thank you, Suzanne. As a woman of color and also as Chief of Talent Acquisition for the CIA, it's important as I and my team look to continuously onboard the talent of the future as well as the leaders of the future that we consider diversity and ensure that as we build the workforce of the future and prepare to bring them on board, that they will be reflective of America long term.
Great, thank you. And Teresa, over to you.
I think first and foremost, I am a mom of a son with autism. So I think that is my main driver in wanting to change the conversation nationally around what it means to hire for autism and for neurodiversity. And so I think that is my main goal through this, is to just take away some of that fear and stigma, and so that the conversation around what it means to hire, especially for neurodiversity and any sort of, actually really any sort of disability in general, so we just change that conversation.
Good time to do that. Maggie, over to you.
And just to echo Ambassador Jenkins' statements, I really appreciate you all including me. And I know we were talking before, like I feel like, as Teresa said, like I'm the extra who kind of got added into the Emmy Awards. So this is great. And I think something we talk about a lot with NatSec Girl Squad, this idea that if you are soft on diversity, you are soft on defense, right? If you don't care about this, you don't care about America. And sometimes when I say that to people, you know, they're a little taken back, but I mean it. I'm a pretty direct person and I do mean it. And really to echo what's already been said by the other panelists, I'm not interested in proving why diversity necessarily makes us better or stronger, though I know that it does. I think there's a lot of research that indicates that to us. I think when you're coming from a place of national security and defense, and you don't have the option of being wrong a whole lot, right? There are real consequences to that. We need to always be pushing to be better. So I'm more interested in having people answer the question for me: why is a homogenous team better, right? Like prove the negative to me, because if you can't tell me why that option is better, why shouldn't we try something else?
Great. Thank you, Maggie. So Bonnie, I learned during one of our dry runs in the green room about your work with naval intelligence. Could you share a little bit about the highs and lows of that experience?
Thanks. Yes, I had a great time in naval intelligence. I actually moved from the Air Force to the Navy, and went directly into direct commission into the Navy. And it was a great experience. I think in terms of the conversation we're having today, there were not a lot of women of color, particularly in the officer ranks in naval intel. And so I think that, I'm not sure what it's like today because I'm not in it right now, but I would dare to say that hopefully it's changed a bit more in terms of having people of color and having women of color in the ranks, and more women, of course, in the higher ranks of naval intel and the officers. So that was definitely not reflected very much there. So I think there certainly is space for more voices, more diverse voices in the field of naval intelligence, and I'm confident and hopeful that that's actually happening.
Well, thank you for your service. Sharonda, I had a question for you about education and recruitment and how you all look to enrich your pipeline at CIA. But first, just want to say kudos to the leadership there. As far as having women leaders, I think you all have set the bar for a lot of other agencies to emulate. So it's very inspiring to see what you all have done with some of the leadership roles that women have taken on there at CIA.
Thank you. We're very proud of what we've accomplished with respect to women in leadership, and we continue to press forward. So it's a very exciting time for us. As it relates to recruitment and education and enriching our pipeline, we obviously value education, and many of our occupations have a minimum requirements related to occupation, but not all of them. That said, I really want to emphasize that we value experiences, and people may not know that. We really look at what our applicants can bring to the table as far as experience, because that experience will show us whether they're dedicated, whether they are resilient, whether they are agile. And these are critical to our mission as an agency across the board. As we think about experience, as we think about education, we use this as a foundation, but also align that against diversity, which is one of our key objectives within recruitment itself. And by using this as a foundation, we've been able to enrich our pipeline by recruiting diverse talent, onboarding diverse talent. We use different sources and methodologies to do so. And we're very intentional about our outreach and engagement, not only with academic institutions, but also with various organizations that have significant populations of diversity. So we still have work to do, but we're excited about the achievements that we've made, and we continuously evaluate our model, our way forward, where we're going, and adjust accordingly to continue to, again, enrich our pipeline.
I think that's well said. I think continual evaluation of all of our programs, particularly during this time, is really, really critical to moving the conversation and our actions forward. Teresa, when many people think of diversity inclusion, I think, race, culture, sexual orientation come to mind. However, neurodiversity is an emerging focus, maybe not as much as it should be, with both industry and government. Some people think of neurodiversity as a disability. Some of us think of neurodiversity as a superpower, those of us with children on the spectrum particularly. Can you tell us why it's important to have folks that are neurodiverse on the spectrum in our workforce, both public, private, academic?
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty deep question. Part of the answer is we already do. The super conservative numbers say at least 1% of our population is somewhere on the spectrum. And so that means you're already working with folks who are autistic. And so it's important to sort of understand what that means and help them shine as much as they can. But also that diversity, neurodiversity, crosses so many boundaries. It doesn't care about your ethnicity. It doesn't care about your economic background. It reaches everybody in all aspects of society. So it is really a cross-cutting diversity issue. And the reason they're important is this talent pool of people whose brains just work on a different wavelength in some incredible ways that it can be a struggle that they tend to see the forest and not they're a tree and not the forest, so that they're not getting the big picture, but they know that tree. And if you need to know what's going on with that tree, by God, they're going to know everything about it in a lot of cases. So it is really, really important to tap into that's already there, and then to also seek it out and bring in some of that, just, not just diversity of thought from their background, but their brains are just wired different. And so you're getting real diversity of actual physical, the way their brains think.
Well said. Maggie, what must organizations in the intelligence and national security space do to address this moment that we're in here in America?
I think that's a great question. And I think the first thing to realize is that every organization is different. So the answer is going to be different. And even within each organization, there are different pockets, different departments, different cultures, different needs. But generally speaking, part of running unicorn strategies means I get to have my hands on a lot of different pots. And we're most well known for NAPSEC Girl Squad, which with 40,000 members, you learn a lot of stuff. And I think probably the biggest takeaways that apply across the board are recognize that whether we like it or not, the current system as it exists has been built around an existing idea of a default, right? So something that I refer to as pale, male, and stale, keeping in mind that you can't do anything about how you were born, but you can choose whether or not you're stale. And what I mean by that is that assuming that demographic profile and that lived experience is normal, right? So for example, at the FBI, the grip width of your standard service weapon is standardized to the size of an average man's hand. And the idea that some women may need a modified grip on their weapon, it suggests that women need something different or additional. And if we can really flip the way we're thinking that somebody who is outside of cis, straight, white guy needs something special, and in fact, we need policies and infrastructure and behavior that benefits our whole workforce equally, that tends, I think, to be the best place to start.
That was a good analogy. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So Bonnie, when we first talked quite a few months ago, someone fortunately made a virtual introduction for me to you. You mentioned that people of color, not just women, but people of color are sometimes intimidated or fearful of the security clearance process. And it was the first time I'd heard that. And I've shared what you are going to share with us in so many conversations over the past few months. And it was, maybe our viewers, this is something they already know, but it was extremely enlightening for me. So could you share a little more about what you meant by those comments back 6 months ago?
Yeah, what I basically meant by that statement is that I know a number of people of color who have applied for jobs and filled out the forms for the background clearance, and it's waiting and waiting and waiting, and not knowing what's going on. And there's a lot of concern about, a lot of them have extended families around the world, and you know, I know of one woman who's Pakistani American, and she has a lot of relatives in Pakistan and relatives in the UK, and I mean, and so she has a lot of connections because she has a lot of relatives in many parts of the world, and so that has, because of that in her background, that has been a source of concern because it has slowed her down, and it's made it much more difficult for her to get a security clearance, not because there's anything wrong with anything she's done, just because of her extensive background. It's created just a lot of problems. And so she knows that, she'll tell colleagues, they'll hear that, and then that kind of generates this feeling of why should I apply to a particular job? I got to fill out these long forms. Nothing may come of it. Oh, yes, I have family who live in different parts of the world. It is what it is. And as a result, they're on wait lists. They don't get their security clearance, and so that does create a sense within the communities that want these jobs where you need security clearances, that either they apply and they don't get it, or they just don't even apply for the jobs. So that really calls for looking at the process, and just rethinking how we're doing the process of security clearances, and the way in which that's creating barriers for some people who may want to get in, and that's also a factor in diversity and inclusion in entities, particularly where you need jobs for security clearances.
Well said.
That too.
So Teresa, we talked a little bit about this previously, and I'm drawing a stereotype, but that a lot of folks that are neurodiverse or on the spectrum are often rule followers. You would think that they would be highly clearable, but there seem to be some obstacles for those that are neurodiverse in approaching the security clearance process. Could you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and I think you just hit it on the head when you said in approaching it. It's not in the clearance itself. It goes back to Bonnie. It's the fear. It's so that there's fear not just from folks on the spectrum, and like you said, broad generalizations, broad generalizations, but
Yeah.
Tend to really overthink. What do they really mean by that? Well, why are they asking me that? What are they trying to get to? What if I answer wrong? And I think that the same thing Bonnie was touching on, only 200 times worse, as it, at least with my son, everything is that 200 times worse than it would be for everybody else. But it's not just coming from the neurodivergent folks. It's also coming from people looking at hiring them. So I've been talking to a lot of agencies about our pilot program. And number one question from every single one of them is, what about clearances? Are they an issue? Everybody just assumes that if there's a thing, that clearances are going to be an issue. We just hired our service provider that's going to help us this week, just hired them, that's going to help us with our pilot, and they've done hundreds. And they're like, well, no, I mean, you just fill out this form and you just, sit there with them while they're freaking out and tell them everything's okay, and it's fine. But it's that fear, like Bonnie mentioned, that I think stops people from even trying, if on both ends.
So Maggie, from your 40,000 members, any takeaways when they are considering the intelligence community as a career path, or get to the point where they have the opportunity to pursue a clearance?
Yeah, so very similar to what Ambassador Jenkins was mentioning, and another issue that comes up is, what if you are a first-generation American or the child of an immigrant who came here legally or without papers? Not everybody is coming from a culture and a place where a background investigator calls you up and you want to answer that phone call, right? You think the census is a challenge. Try filling out an SF-86. So these challenges are real, they are intersectional, and they are in many ways a nightmare, but a solvable nightmare. I think one of the other challenges that we're really seeing is that not everybody knows at 18 or 20 or even 25 that this is what they want to do with their lives, or it's something they want to try. And so they don't know or don't think to or can't afford to take an undergraduate or even graduate school internship in one of these spaces to get a clearance. And then here you are out of school, and you have all the other qualifications. You have language skills, you have intercultural competency, all of these other things, but you're not cleared. And that is an enormous barrier, not just for that job seeker, for that person, but also for employers, because the process is long, it's arduous, it's unpredictable, and it's expensive. And so getting your clearance sponsored is probably the most significant barrier to what we would call, and that's what girls call, meaningful employment, meaning that it is meaningful to the person who is employed, not, you know, the outside world. It's what they want to be doing, because so few places are willing to pony up the money and the resources. And I will also say that, you know, unfortunately, just a few months ago, I had a recruiter from a consulting company say to me, well, based on the number of vowels in somebody's last name, I know right out of the gate whether they're going to be cleared. And if I don't think they're going to be cleared, I'm not going to look at their resume. And as I mentioned, I'm a pretty direct person, so that was a really, really long phone call for them. But sometimes people ask me, like, what is the most significant thing you think we could do to move towards meaningful, competent diversity in this space? It's security clearance reform. It's not sexy, but it's the answer.
That's very insightful, and shame on that recruiter for uttering that. So switching gears a little bit from security clearances, Sharonda, I wanted to see if you could talk to us a little bit about CIA's diversity strategy, and what you think a good diversity strategy looks like. Is, you know, all these virtual attendees are tuning in and they are looking to refine or further define their diversity strategies. I think there's probably a lot they can learn from you.
Thank you. So just from a personal perspective, what is a diversity strategy? What are important components? As I thought about this, I like to take things back to basics and use my own experience. So as we thought about our diversity strategy as it related to diversity recruitment, I thought about the 5 W's. And important for us, as well as with our recruitment cadre, and we have an extended cadre of hiring advisors, was for everyone to really understand what their role was and why this was important. And we did that through extensive communication, discussion. We ensured that it was every part of the strategic direction was based on data. And so that we would drive towards changing the trends that we had seen. We actually did a deep dive into our data, and an amazing mentor, an amazing leader that I worked for several years ago said, what is measured gets done. And we found that by measuring and understanding what our gaps in recruitment were, we were able to take very intentional, deliberate steps to address them. The other key part of a strategy is to have strong, consistent, yet simple communication so everyone understands their role and what they need to do. It must be executionable, as well as it must address organizational systems, cultures, and policies. So those are key aspects when you think about building a strategy that you really need to focus on. With respect to the CIA overall strategy, we have a very comprehensive diversity strategy at the organizational level, and it focuses on four goals: weaving diversity and inclusion throughout the talent cycle, being an employer of choice, increasing diversity of leadership, and creating a culture of inclusion. Again, with my focus being recruitment, having that data-rich approach, given the complexity of our recruitment cycle, from onboarding from initial contact to onboarding, it was important for us to really look at the end-to-end process and find those gaps where we were losing diverse candidates. And based on that, we started building executionable plans around each area. And as a result, we have identified those areas that we need to focus on, and we have taken action to actually start addressing each area. I will say it's still a work in progress, but we have seen an increase in diversity in our pipeline, as well as in the number of hires that we have, or the percentage of hires that we've onboarded over the last couple of months.
I hope some of our viewers were taking notes about what you all are doing that's impactful there at CIA. Speaking of pipelines, Bonnie, how does the pipeline of women and people of color get identified, and how does one get into that pipeline? I would think that your organization is a great place to start, but what sort of groups do you all cater to? Is it college students or high school students? Where do you develop your pipeline, and what advice would you give those who wanted to get into the pipeline?
Yeah, well, the organization really focuses on both. It has really three pillars. Two of the pillars are really focusing on pipeline issues, and looking at young women as well as mid-career is where we really focus most of our attention. Most of the older women we incorporate as mentors for our youngers, but we focus on the mid-level. We want to highlight the women who are in the field, because a lot of times you don't see them, you don't know who's actually working on these issues, and you don't know that there's all these women of color in the area of peace and security broadly defined. But we also want to focus on how do we help them stay in the field, because ultimately, if a goal is to have impact on policy and to have people at the table who have diverse voices in policy, you have to help them make sure that they're actually there. They're not going to just show up out of nowhere. So we want to make sure that we find ways to build a safe space for women, and to have a group that they can identify with, so they're not feeling by themselves, that they can share their experiences, but also share professional things that are going on and have substantive discussions. And then for the younger women, we have a pipeline program for younger women, and of course that's just to maintain and get more young girls in the field, not only because we want to do that and get them in the pipeline, but also because even if they don't pursue careers in peace and security, for example, national security, at least they are aware of these issues and why it matters to them. So there's a number of organizations that we work with on pipeline issues, who are also focusing on these issues. And so we work with them to also, to help bring our perspective into some of the things they're doing. And we also engage other entities that are working on parts of the pipeline. So, and that's working just not just with NGOs, but with schools, universities, minority serving institutions, talking with them about peace and security, a lot of the things that organizations do to bring both young people and also to maintain in the pipeline the mid-career women who are in the field, and to also give them more exposure, so they're also appreciated for what they're actually doing.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because we talk about recruitment and educating folks about the intelligence community, but it's also about retention and ensuring that they have the tools and resources to stay in the field and also to advance themselves. So I have questions rolling in, and so I have some that were sent in prior to the event, and then some that are rolling in right now through our portal. But this next question is from Kimberly Orr from GDIT, and it's for Teresa. Kimberly wants to know, when job hunting, how can someone with ADHD sell their value and combat prejudices? Thoughts on revealing their neurodiversity to their potential employer?
That is a great question, and the self-disclosure question is huge and very personal, and it depends is the real true answer to that, and I'm so sorry, but it depends. And part of me wants to say if they won't hire you because of your issues, you don't want to work there, but I have a job, so that's easy for me to say, right? But that is, that's the upper hand answer to that. But I think your best tool is going to be knowing your worth and learning some of that vocabulary to use to express it. You can feel like you're a great person, but if you don't have the words to say why, nobody else is going to understand that. So do some research on what is your superpower as somebody with ADHD, and hint, you're not easily distracted. You just tend to really, 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 really focus on something specific that doesn't necessarily, is not necessarily, well, for me, it was homework, or whatever. But so sell that as your hyper focus and your hyper ability to, and look for some of that vocabulary, research strengths of ADHD, and get used to talking about yourself as a superhero in those areas. And I think that's the best thing you can carry in with you.
That's a great response. I hope my daughter is tuning in right now. So, Ann Matthew from Momentum, Maggie, this question is for you. What would you say, in working with some of the organizations you've worked with, is one of the more difficult parts of implementing a D&I strategy? Is it with the leadership, or just making sure there's continuous long-term follow-through?
So it's a great question, and I'm thinking of a couple different examples. I think actually the challenges start in the kind of goal setting, or like, what is our definition of success starting point, right? Like, because you can't boil the ocean all at once. As someone who frequently tries, it cannot be done. So you've got to really figure out, like, what are you aiming for? And that seems to be the challenge, because saying, oh, we want a more diverse, inclusive culture. Okay, that's like a lovely strategic aim, but what is your measurable goal, right? What is your operational plan to make that happen? The more specific you can be, the less trouble you have getting there and sustaining it. So I guess an example of that would be, for Not Set Girl Squad, there are a million things I wish we could do all of the time, but we are really focused on this idea of competent diversity, which for us means not just getting people in the room and paid attention to, but having them feel and know that they are coming from a place of expertise and not being afraid of that own expertise, right? So that means ensuring people are having access to regular classes on not just how to brief, but how do you brief in a particular environment, right? DIA versus CIA versus OD&I versus the Navy. Like, that's what we are focused on. It doesn't mean that other things aren't important to us, but in working with clients, we've found that really, like, the more specific you can be in the goal setting, it takes care of a lot of the other problems later. And Not Set Girl Squad's name is Not Set Girl Squad, but much like today's event, like, we actively encourage and want men involved, right? Not Set Girl Squad is open to, super important. From a just statistical perspective, there are entirely too many men for there not to be a peaceful transition of power here, right? Like, there are so many of them, we need their help. And I think it can be surprising to people if you know your audience and you really know what are your shared values, and because we're all in this national security and defense space, like, we all care about our country and we care about the world. If you can start from where you agree, you're going to find a lot more active champions than I think you might anticipate, and not as many roadblocks.
I'm glad you mentioned getting men engaged, because the title of this event is Empowering Women and Engaging Men. And I think it's important that there are certain environments where I think it's great to have only women in the room talking to each other. But I also think it can fall on deaf ears if there are not men there to hear the messaging as well. Another organization that's one of our partners here, AWIC, Amazing Women in the Intelligence Community, they host a variety of events throughout the year. And oftentimes they have male panelists or male attendees, as it should be. So kudos to Not Set Girl Squad for following that model as well. So I got a chat here from my colleague, Peggy O'Connor, and she says, people keep asking how they know candidates are diverse, as many don't self-identify. Oh. Just a free throw out there if anybody wants to take that question on. Thank you, Peggy.
So there are certain grammar things, blame it on my ADHD, that make me absolutely wild. And it includes confusing quotation and quote. One is a verb, one is a noun. A candidate is not inherently diverse, right? Diverse means a variety of. So you need to, it's not the tree in the forest, it's the forest in relation to the tree, right? Like a single person, is the fact that I'm a Persian Jewish woman does not make me diverse, because it has to be in comparison to something else. So they probably are self-identifying if you know what you're looking for. I think Sharonda probably knows how to say that better than I do, but like maybe you're just not listening.
Anybody else
No,
want to take that one? Or
Megan, you're absolutely correct. To your latter point about there are ways that people self-identify. So when you get an application, when you get a resume, you may not be able to always know if they have not identified themselves as a minority. However, if you look at organizations, if you look at different clubs and things that individuals have participated in, you can sometimes, I'm not going to say all the time, but you can sometimes make an assumption as to what ethnicity, what race that an individual may be. It could be the school that they've gone to, because many applicants, and we have some amazing applicants that come from minority serving institutions. And again, it's an assumption, but there are ways that in many cases that you can tell, and I would say the demographic, so the racial or ethnic demographic of an applicant. That is very important when you're thinking about recruitment, because Sharonda's opinion, everyone has a bias. And we're very focused within my organization in you have your bias. It's important for you to know that you have a bias, to acknowledge that you have it, and then what are you going to do to address it so that you are unintentionally not disadvantaging someone because of a bias that you may have. So that is a work in progress. It really requires a lot of self-work. It requires coaching in some cases, and that is what we're very much focused on.
Can I also jump in just very briefly?
Please,
I just wanted to also add that one thing to do is also to first of all, make the pool as wide as you can, and also make sure that you are looking, that you get announcements out to groups that, like mine, just as an example only, but just that are, catering to bringing in more diverse voices. And so, do what you can, take that extra step to make sure that it's getting out to a wider group. And that will also help to make sure that, the applicant pool itself is going to be more diverse itself. I agree that there are things within it that you can sometimes tell. The interesting thing that's going on now is that in order to be more open, they're actually starting to do things like make blind applications. So taking away like names and things like that, that will that can make it a little. It's actually a move to make things more even and equal. It does have the also the side of, well, they make it a little more difficult to figure out who is,
right.
because a lot of those things. So it's an interesting dynamic, but that's one way that's a trend we're going on now, which is to make these blind applications. So you take away a lot of the things that are more identifying because they want it to be more even, and to take away the opportunities for there to be implicit bias. So it's an interesting dynamic.
Can I add one other?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. So I think something we see a lot with Not Psych Girl Squad is you can tell whether or not someone's had an unpaid internship. You can tell whether or not someone has gone to school part-time and worked while they were in school, either undergrad or graduate school. You can tell if somebody went to community college before they went to a four-year institution. And that doesn't necessarily tell you a whole lot about their racial or ethnic identity, but it can tell you about other parts of who they are that bring much needed diversity to the community. So I think, like Ambassador Jenkins is right, like you remove these other things and it can get hard. But if you're looking, you know, oh, they went to Princeton, Georgetown, like, okay, you can, if there's nothing that makes you say, huh, I wonder why they did that, then you're probably getting the thing that you're used to, is my guess.
That's interesting. One of my colleagues, he better be tuning in, but I always look and see where somebody waited tables, because I think that is a very character building skill, regardless of what field you want to work in. And it shows you can multitask and deal with people. So that to me is important. And then I hope the rest of my team is also tuning in, listening to what Bonnie said about, you know, communicating with other organizations. You know, we have an internship program at INSA, graduate student internship program. And when we do our next round of hiring, I certainly hope the notice will go out to all of you all, so we can help build and enrich our pipeline. So Sharonda, this question is from you, from Kia Anderson. She asked, have there been efforts to recruit within historically Black colleges and universities, or to at least mentor some of these students there within the CIA?
The answer is yes and yes. So we have actually signed a memorandum of agreement with Southern University last fall. They are one of our signature schools. So we have several signature schools that have significant diversity. Two are HBCUs, one being Southern University. With respect to Southern, as a signature school, we spend a lot of time on their campus. We do a lot of engagement. We are in the classrooms. We're doing simulations. We are mentoring. We also have a senior champion assigned there, as well as one of our engineers who spends significant time there. She's an alum. She spends significant time working with the STEM students and educating them on what opportunities we have at CIA in the STEM field. And again, a lot of outreach, a lot of engagement there, but also many other HBCUs as well. We have, in addition to the signature schools, we have tiered schools, and our tier 1 schools, again, significant level of engagement. They also have senior champions, and we are on the campus. We are engaging the students throughout the year. So it's not, you know, the traditional, we go in for a recruitment fair and we're gone. We are very intentional about our work, not only with HBCUs, but other minority serving institutions as well.
Great. That's encouraging. So Teresa, I'm going to put you on the spot. Christopher Wolf with Mantech asked if you can give some concrete examples of any type of innovation that was sparked by having folks that are diverse in the workforce. And he's not asking specifically about neurodiverse, but I'm going to take it down, you know, to that narrow of a focus.
So one of the beauties of being involved with a lot of companies doing these programs is you get to hear lots and lots of stories. And one of the stories that I hear over and over and over again is you bring in a group of folks who are neurodivergent, especially on the autism spectrum, and you think in your mind, they like repetition, they don't mind doing the same thing every day, so we're going to give them this job. I have a stack of 2-year-old documents. They need to be entered. They take like a week a piece, and these guys are not going to mind doing that. Everybody else hates my guts when I give it to them. And you bring in the autistic talent, and they start on it, and they go, this is crap, just like everybody else does. But what they do is they go home, and over the weekend, they learn Python, like you do, and they come back and they write an algorithm that does that in 2 minutes each file instead of 2 weeks, and totally transform the whole department. So those are the kinds of stories you hear a lot, that they come in and instead of like the rest of us see that and think, ugh, they see that and they think it shouldn't be that way, and they make it another way. So that's my favorite example.
Description. So Emma Jackson asked this question, and any of you all can answer it, but she says, change starts with us. What do each of you as leaders plan to promote regarding real change in relation to diversity, equity, and inclusion? Has anything, over the past several months particularly sparked you all, whether it's personally, a goal, or within your organizations? Just throwing it out there. And if not, I think we all need to sit down and figure out what that is. So,
I'll talk about something that that we've done. I think I mentioned this to some of you already. Is the work that WCAPS is doing with a number of organizations following up on the George Floyd murder. We were working with a number of organizations that span not just national security and intelligence, but also peace and security and human rights and humanitarian and media. A number of organizations who signed on to our solidarity statement and 12 commitments in the solidarity statement. And we're developing an infrastructure to work with the organizations. And really the goal is not only to follow up with the 12 commitments, but also to sustain the efforts that organizations say that they want to do now at this moment, to make sure that 5 months from now, next year, there's still this commitment to change, to combat racism and discrimination, and to promote DEI within their organizations. So it's quite interesting. We'll see how it goes, but we're working on that infrastructure right now. And the type of organizations go everywhere from think tanks to philanthropy, to regular NGOs, to research institutions and academic institutions. It's over 200 signatures have signed in a lot of them organizations. So very happy about that, and we'll see where it goes. But that's something that we're going to be really focusing on in the next few months. Well, quite a while, since this problem won't be going away tomorrow, in the future. So, yeah.
great. That's very reassuring. So this is from Stephanie Schneider, and this will probably be the last question I can take from our virtual attendees. But I would like to say before I pose the question, a lot of these questions I look forward to incorporating into future discussions we'll be having. We didn't even get to a quarter of the questions that were submitted, but it demonstrates to me that INSA needs to continue to support this type of dialogue, which we fully intend on doing. But this is for, just throwing it out there. What is some advice, this is from Stephanie Schneider, Bank of America, what is some advice you would give your younger self entering into the intelligence and national security communities, things that you wish you had known then? It could be a long list for a lot of folks, or just really short, pointed examples.
I mean, I'm not that old. I think I'm pretty public. I'm 28. I've turned 28 in quarantine. So the things I tell myself that I wish I knew, at the beginning of my career, which is now, I wish that there are moments where I wish I had taken a more traditional path, right? I wish that I had taken my interest in this space more seriously and gotten an internship and gone that would have gotten me a clearance and gone that route and been a normal person. Purple hair or not, right? Like just been regular. But that's not what the universe had in store for me. So I think what has made that work out for me, and particularly in the context of the question about ADHD, like I know myself really well. I know what I'm good at. I also know what I'm not good at, and I'm not afraid of those things. And I run towards somebody who is good at those things, right? So know yourself really well and figure out what works for you, and don't force yourself into a situation where if you are not an analyst person, like if that's not what brings you joy and helps you find meaning, don't apply to be an analyst. Like stop doing that to yourself, to everyone else. And so don't be afraid of that, and really just focus on like what works for you and then find your way from there.
Bonnie, Sharonda, Teresa?
Yeah, I
Go
think for
ahead.
me, what I would say, is I got into the field and I started working in weapons of mass destruction. So my background is chemical, biological, nuclear non-proliferation issues. And when I got into the field, I was so excited about this work. I didn't think about the fact that there was like nobody like me really working on nuclear issues. Um, and so I think if I were to do it again, I would try to develop more of a support system. One of the reasons why I established my organization was so that there could be a support system for other young women or people of color in this field of national security. And it's been, having started this organization has been amazing. Now I have this huge network that I never had before because I've been, in this field for so long and there's been so few in this WMD field. So I guess if I did it, I mean, I can't fault myself for being excited and running into it and not thinking about whether there was a group of others who looked like me until I got into it. And I've never felt like I shouldn't have done it. But I do recognize now the value of having a support system and and now I'm giving back and making sure others have that. So.
I will say I was very fortunate coming into the agency. I had an African American senior leader take me under his wing, and not everyone has that. Taught me the bureaucracy, how to work through the bureaucracy. The one thing that I think, looking back, to Maggie's point, making sure I know myself, what I desire, and what I'm very good at. I've had an amazing career at the agency. I can't take away from that. But there are things that I wish that I had done, but I didn't know about them. So really having an understanding of all the opportunities that are available and not being afraid to step out into those opportunities, even if you're at a certain level, because it's something you're interested in and something you really want to do.
Yes. I think I would just echo Sharonda. That's exactly what I was going to say. Don't be afraid to do it wrong. Do it wrong, and then do it better the next time. Don't. Yeah, and that goes with disability hiring. That goes with talking with somebody who's different than you. Any of these things that we're trying to accomplish here. Don't be afraid of doing it wrong. Do it and figure it out.
Ladies, thank you so much. I feel kind of guilty. I want to tell all the virtual attendees that we didn't get to touch on every single question and topic. An hour is really not long enough to address innovation as it relates to diversity and inclusion. But as I mentioned, we look forward to hosting sessions like this in the future. And again, want to thank our panelists for being so candid and sharing their thoughtful perspectives with us today. I learned a lot. I'm confident that our audience has some concrete steps that they can apply personally and within their organizations. I want to thank Matice and Mantech for sponsoring today's event. And then also thank our digital playback sponsor, Amentum. All the registered attendees, you'll get links to the recording of this program. And so if you couldn't take notes, like I couldn't take really good notes today, you can watch it again. And then we hope you will also tune in tomorrow. We close out our week with the Sisterhood of Spies happy hour panel at 4:30. We pushed the start time to 4:30 so we could have a little more fun with the session. I, for one, will be enjoying a glass of wine as we celebrate this just really inspiring, pioneering group of women leaders and close out what I would like to think has been a pretty uplifting week of programming. And this concludes today's program. Stay safe, sane, and healthy, and have a wonderful evening. And I look forward to many of you all tuning in tomorrow at 4:30. Thanks again.